Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. We have a great speaker lined up for today. We have General Hank Hatch that has honored us with his presence to come and speak on engineering a sustainable future. Just to give you a little background on Lieutenant General Hatch, in 1992, Hank Hatch retired from the U.S. as Lieutenant General, retired from the Army as Lieutenant General, the Chief of Engineers, and Commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. He is an active volunteer with several professional organizations. Among these have been on 2 boards of the National Research Council, which is the operating arm of the National Academy of Engineering and Sciences. He is also active with the American Association of Engineering Societies, AAES, the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, where he is a former member of the Board of Direction and has chaired on several committees. He is past national president of the National Society for American Military Engineers and is a member of and has chaired the National Science and Engineering Committee of the U.S. National Commission for UNESCO. Hatch earned his bachelor's from West Point and his master's from the Ohio State University. He is a registered professional engineer in the District of Columbia and a distinguished member of ASCE, a distinguished graduate of West Point, and he is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Hank Hatch.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Zek. It's an absolute honor for me to have a chance to be here with you. I'm a bit intimidated by the fact that this is a distinguished lecture series. But it's okay. It's a distinguished lecture, not the lecturer. So I can get away with it. But it's wonderful to be here. I've never been to Auburn before. And I know what your slogan is, and I know what your colors are. And I'm really glad you beat that other team from Alabama in football this last year. Yeah, well done. I choose those teams that I root for with great care. You were hands down number 1. I chose to talk to you today about engineering a sustainable future. And the reason I say that is that I have firmly believed now for going on 3 decades that if we are going to have a sustainable future, it's going to be because we engineers create it. There is no one, no group of professionals capable of doing that except ourselves. And hence it's extremely important that we understand what sustainability is all about and how it relates to the broader context of our national security and enduring peace in this great world. Engineers of all disciplines, not just civils, which I happen to be kind of one. How many civils in the room? Okay. Chemicals? Okay. You'll answer all the chemical engineering questions. That's right. Engineers of all disciplines are the ones that are going to create a sustainable future, but not just working in isolation. As you will see as I go through this, it's working with a lot of others, not just the electricals and the mechanicals and the chemicals, but working with people in disciplines on other parts of the campus that sometimes you never have ventured into. Can you imagine the social scientists, the political scientists, the human scientists? Well, they certainly have a part of it. But we can lead the way if we're willing to. When I visit a campus like I'm delighted to do today, one of the first things I do is to go to the campus website. And I go to the keyword sustainability. And I find amazing things. I have never visited a campus where I've gone on the website and put in sustainability and come up with nothing. I quickly found your Office of Sustainability with a mission to develop an ethic, practice, and culture of sustainability throughout Auburn University, and to serve as a sustainability education and training resource for individuals and organizations within the university and in local, regional, national, and international communities. That's an awesome mission. I also found the university's policy statement on sustainability. How many of you can quote it? No, don't worry. I'll read it to you in case it slipped your mind. The policy statement is that Auburn University is committed to integrating sustainability into all aspects of the university, including operations, instruction, research, and outreach. And I have found, for example, in Georgia Tech and a number of others, that the same sort of philosophy is prevalent. Auburn University considers sustainability a core value and strives for excellence in sustainability through continuous assessment and improvement. And the policy is followed by a long series of very specific actions. If you haven't looked at it lately, you might go onto the university's website, put in sustainability, and just see what you come up with. You'll find a lot of good stuff there, which may or may not have had any impact that you can recognize in your own course of study here. We'll see. But anyway, that's a delightful context for me to talk about engineering a sustainable future, when I realize, at least at the policy level, there is clearly a direction, a support for the ethic of sustainability. Now, sustainability or sustainable development, and I'll use those terms somewhat together, is a topic that continues to stir a lot of sort of creative thought, some controversy, not only in the United States, but worldwide. A topic that was embraced in the late 80s by many as a great new way, a new path forward, but frankly rejected and slam dunked by others as being a left-wing, no-growth conspiracy with all sorts of agendas that a lot of people, particularly engineers, weren't particularly fond of. And I found myself right in the middle of that in the late 80s and early 90s. The latter would often say to me that this sustainability is just a buzzword, and it will quickly move into oblivion. And 5 years from now, nobody will even know what it means. Well, here we are. You've all heard of sustainability, right? It didn't go into oblivion. It's very clearly what could be a very driving philosophy and ethic for all of us. But to the contrary, that notion has clearly moved mainstream, and it has now for well over a decade. And that buzzword is now an enduring philosophy in governments, in business, on campuses, and in our public when they understand what it is. You might wonder, why is a soldier an evangelist for sustainability? In fact, I was asked that by the dean earlier, and I gave him my explanation. My first involvement with the whole notion came in the late 80s. I say late 80s, and I realize, and I look around at these faces, how many of you were not born in the late 80s, by the late 80s? Okay, bear with me, bear with me. Did you ever hear of the Cold War? Okay. Anyway, in the late 80s, a number of us were exploring in the Army America's future post-Cold War. And I had spent at that point already 30 years of my career in the Army, and my war was Vietnam for 1 year, but the rest was the Cold War. The Cold War dominated my whole career. And what the Army and the Department of Defense was doing was to defend us against the threat of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. Anyway, this guy named Gorbachev came on the scene in the Soviet Union, and he started preaching openness and let's work together and things like that. And we could see clearly the Cold War was going to end. That Berlin Wall was going to come down. It hadn't yet, but it was going to come down. So you got to look forward. You know, lead time to make any institutional changes in something the size of the Army or the Corps of Engineers is more than a couple of days. So we looked ahead, and we came across the notion that the Army's purpose was not just to fight the nation's wars, as some in uniform felt. It says, no, our real purpose was to ensure enduring peace. And that is a much broader context, a much broader concept than simply being able to fight the nation's wars. So if you're going to look at enduring peace, the idea would be to involve yourself in a number of sustainable activities with other agencies, with nations, to ensure that those conditions that lead to armed conflict do not occur. That do not occur. So the concept, we would call it a whole of government idea today, meant just not the Department of Defense. Remember a few minutes ago I said the electrical's got to work with mechanicals and chemicals and the social people and the human people? Well, we realized we had to work with a lot of other agencies in our federal government. It wasn't just the Department of Defense. Our first partner had to be the Department of State. You know, back in those days, the basic concept, in peacetime, state's in charge over there. In wartime, Department of Defense is in charge over there. Did they ever kind of get to... There was never a reasonable juncture between the two. So we realized we needed to work for that. So we quickly linked the notion of security, stability, and sustainability, those three S's, as the keys to what we called enduring peace. If we somehow could assure those three things. So sustainability was one of the three. And that's why we sort of glommed onto it in the Corps of Engineers, later in the Army, and then some of the other services as well. And of course, it's much broader than that now. One of the references that turned us on was a book entitled Our Common Future, published in 1987 by the World Commission on Environment and Development. Our Common Future. You might look it up. It's just a little paperback about this thick. And it provided some of the first really good definitions of what sustainability was all about. Gro Brundtland, a prime minister in Scandinavia, chaired that and sometimes referred to as the Brundtland Report. And the definition, and I'll read what it says. Sustainable development is a process of change in which the exploitation of resources, mostly natural in this case, the direction of investments, and the orientation of technological development and institutional change are all in harmony. All in harmony, not just pursuing one or the other, but they're all in harmony. They're integrated. And enhance both current and future potential to meet human needs and aspirations. The shorthand version of that, and you've probably heard this many times, is meeting the needs of the present or today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And we say future generations, and we're not talking about just my kids, my grandkids, my great-grandkids. We're talking about indefinitely. That is a vision. That's an ethic. It's not a strategy with supporting tactics, not a set of specific technologies, processes, laws, regulations, or standards. The application of this definition initially focused on environmentally sustainable development. And that was the term used initially, back in the late 80s, early 90s, by people that were supporting the concept, the notion of sustainability. It was environmentally sustainable development. I had some civil engineers really revolted at that. I said, well, look at it's an adverb, an adjective, and a noun. I said, come on, engineers, what's the noun? They said, development. So, okay. They could start listening to us. Environmentally sustainable development. But over the years, beginning maybe around the turn of this last century, a little before, I and many others realized that we had to look at that adverb. It was too narrow. It was too narrow. We would suboptimize on the environmental concerns and forget some of the others. In a nation, in part of the world where we have a market economy, clearly economically sustainable development was another approach to it. In a socially conscious world, socially sustainable development had to be part of it. So that very quickly became what is known by many now as the triple bottom line. Sustainability, environmentally, economically, and socially. And if you stop to think about it for a minute, depending on what you're doing, you can add other adverbs or in whatever context you're working. In the public sector, and I'll be talking to some Department of Transportation people tomorrow, very clearly, whatever you're doing must be politically sustainable, or it's not going to happen. The appropriations don't come. The authorization simply doesn't come. I could add ethically sustainable. I could add culturally sustainable, particularly when we're working overseas. Now, some would say that the culture, even here in Alabama, from down in Mobile up to Birmingham, is quite different. Well, I'm talking about more vast differences than that. When you're working overseas, the differences can be really in the extreme. So if we're going to engage in some development endeavor, here, nationally, or overseas, think of the various adverbs that should be applied to that. And I would go further to say that those adverbs are not independent. They're interdependent. And the goal is to pick the right adverbs for the situation and ensure that you have achieved the correct balance among them. The correct balance among them. I'll say right here at the outset, nearly the outset, I don't use the word green anymore. I do not use the word green. Because the word green suggests that the focus is on the environmental component. And we're going to forget about the economic aspects and the human aspects. We can't do that. We can't do that. We shouldn't do that. In fact, I think I'm going to change the title of my talk. Green alone is not sustainable. Please, green alone is not sustainable. Anyway, I'll probably mention green a couple of times in here, but when I'm saying that, I'm referring to the environmental aspects, not the others. And don't get me wrong, I am not putting down the concern for the environment and natural resources at all. I'm just saying do it in a balance. Now, we have a lot of impediments in pursuing a sustainable future, we as engineers and the scientific community. And one of the problems is we're so highly partitioned. Even within the engineers, highly partitioned. Those divisions promote us an opportunity to focus on these particular problems. I'll cite a few of them, but renders us somewhat impotent in solving things collectively. For engineers, there are many challenges that cut across numerous segments of our profession in the development of projects or even in the manufacturing of products, in the development, delivery, and operational phases. And they include training and education, certification or licensure, risk management, liability, partnering and alternate dispute resolution, legislation, regulation, and I would add public awareness. Public awareness of what engineers do in contributing to the well-being of our society. But the common interest, I believe, could and should be, and it can be an integrating influence, and that is the concept of sustainability. I believe it's engineers' greatest challenge in many cases. For some of us that are a bit longer in the tooth than many of you, it has required a cultural change. Just within the last hour, I was looking at an environmental engineering laboratory. When I was an undergraduate, it said, we're going to do some environmental engineering. I said, what? I would say what? We didn't know what that meant. So a number of us were sort of retread, fortunately, to understand that. But the issue is a challenge. It's a challenge to our traditional ways of doing business, traditional education, our methods, technology, and even, to some extent, our ethics. That issue is the achievement of development that is sustainable. Achievement of that goal will change the way we consider ourselves, the way we consider how we fit into society, how those that we wish to attract to our profession view us, and how our clients and the broad public views us. Our relevancy as engineers and our reputation, I believe, will depend largely on our willingness and demonstrated ability to contribute meaningfully to a future that is sustainable. Well, achieving sustainable development isn't simple. There's no simple blueprint. What works in developed countries may not work in the developing and undeveloped world, and I can attest to that. A set of feasible options for each country is shaped by its culture, as I indicated before, its market mechanisms, environmental resources, population, industrial structure, labor force, governance, infrastructure, geographic conditions, and so on. Consider for a moment the complexities of development and reconstruction in the war-ravaged Middle East compared to doing something here locally. I mean, it's entirely different context. The process for change requires the expertise and responsibility of all disciplines and cooperation at all levels. I've already alluded to that. Globally, regionally, nationally, and locally. While every society and perhaps every individual will ultimately become somehow involved in what I'm talking about, engineers must be the agents of change. We do things. We get things done. We create the built environment, for better or for worse. Others don't necessarily do that. I haven't seen an economist yet that poured concrete around rebar. Now, they may have funded it, given as well. But anyway, we're the ones that, at the end of the day, actually do it. But we must actively engage with all those disciplines and many publics to start a process. There are a number of steps and things we could do. One is, this is particularly true for my generation and those a little after me, pursue a broad continuous education. We had to. And let me assure every one of you undergraduates, you're going to face the same thing. Technology alone is going to leap forward so much more quickly during your lifetime than mine. That if you don't maintain a continuous contact with whatever those technologies are that influence your particular discipline, you're going to fall behind. You're going to fall behind. None of those factors associated with it, social, economical, environmental, economic, are static. They're continually changing, continually changing. The second is adopt ecosystems thinking. Traditionally, engineers are taught to break every problem down into little bitty pieces, but they never come all back together again. Think about ecosystems and how ecosystems work. And although the task we are given today may be to design one aspect of the foundation of a building, that's fine, but somebody in that system has got to be thinking broadly about the entire system. Engineers should approach sustainable development in a way that imitates natural processes as multidimensional circular processes. We're very proud to be problem solvers, but at what level? Just the building foundation? The entire building system? Or get this, maybe just how do you meet the client's needs? Things like that go way beyond just the matter of fact, I'm reminded of a story, Andrew Young. Remember Andrew Young? Congressman, U.S. rep to the UN, former mayor of Atlanta, wonderful guy. I worked with him shortly after he retired for a while. He had a terrific story. He talked about coming upon a construction site and walking up to one workman. And he said, what are you doing? And the workman kind of, what do you think I'm laying bricks. That's as far as he would go, laying bricks. He goes to the next one. He said, what are you doing? And he sort of backs up. He meant, well, I'm building a wall that's going to be part of a foundation for something. That's as far as he could go. And he went to the third guy. He said, what are you doing? He was doing exactly the same thing the other two were. Exactly. And the guy stood up, he backed away, and kind of looked up. He said, mister, I am building a cathedral. That's what I mean by having the broader context kind of in mind. The third is seek and apply environmental economic tools. Last time I checked, we're still in at least a quasi-market economy. And anyway, if you don't have economic tools to support what you are doing that are supporting the social and environmental aspects of sustainability, you will not be able to carry the argument before the Congress, before the board of the corporation, or whoever the decision makers are that will decide what and where things are going to be developed. Must have economic tools. In a market economy, we must demonstrate that. The fourth is look for sustainable alternatives. Owners and people that make decisions, public and private sector, about doing things, do not necessarily think of sustainable alternatives, but they can be offered. More and more governments are requiring, for example, U.S. green building standards, as a for instance. So that's one aspect, at least, of thinking about one component of sustainability. And already, before they even come to you, they've thought about the economic side. Whether they even understand the social side is another core question. Unless it's public works, and they generally do, because the social side drives the politics, generally. But anyway, they don't think about sustainable alternatives. So it's up to you that understand sustainable methodologies, technologies, and materials to offer them and be proponents for them. Be proponents for them. As you know, ASCE produces every few years a nation's report card on infrastructure. Ever seen that or heard about that? Yeah, and they give letter grades to the various segments of the nation's infrastructure. And I was on the committee working on that, about the third iteration, I guess. And the entire effort, frankly, was devoted to convincing the public and convincing Congress and other decision makers that there needs to be a higher level of prudent investment in the nation's infrastructure. Okay. Then I threw out a weird idea. I said, why do we also include in our report card that we should be pursuing non-structural alternatives as well? And they looked at me and said, what? Not build something? We're here to build things. I said, wait a minute, time out. Non-structural alternatives. What does the client, what does the public really need? Do they really need a road from A to B? Does that industrial client really need that additional building here? Think of non-structural alternatives broadly across all the various segments of infrastructure. Okay, you could say, well, you're talking about zoning and urban sprawl and smart development. Okay, well, yeah, to some extent I am. When I say think of non-structural alternatives, I say we engineers should be looking when we can at not just the supply side of provide the building. We should be helping the public, the Congress, the state legislature, the private sector owner consider the demand side. We engineers that are normally only involved in supplying stuff, buildings, what have you, also ought to think about, can we serve the public? Can we serve that client, whomever they may be, better if we suggest something that does not involve a building? Can we do something else? Non-structural alternatives. Manage the demand as well as just the supply. My fifth is develop and apply technology to sustainability. This is particularly true in materials, and we see it all the time. I saw it out in the asphalt paving situation that I had a chance to see here at Auburn earlier today. 6, develop multidisciplinary teamwork. I've already alluded to that. And they may not necessarily occur strictly at the baccalaureate undergraduate level, but clearly out of the real world is multidisciplinary. The real world is not just civil engineering. The real world involves the others. And to the extent you can, while you're still in school, engage with them. And I've talked to the faculty a bit about that. All sides of this campus should be working together. And again, sustainability could help bring that together. And I mentioned particularly getting the physical scientists and the social scientists together on the same sheet of music. My 7th item is listen to those that we serve. Sometimes we are not the best listeners in the world. On one hand, I suggested we should be pushing or suggesting sustainable alternatives to things that a client might come in with a fixed idea. The client already knows what they want. Don't tell me I can look at an alternative. We do need to listen to them. Because if you're going to teach them anything, the first thing you need to do is what? Listen to them. Get to know them. Becoming more relevant to them. Responding to them. The 8th is continually educate those that we serve. As I indicated before, they don't necessarily come up automatically. In their DNA isn't the development of sustainable alternatives. Engineers and scientists should be assertive teachers through the whole process. Well, that's the end of my ticking off 8 items. Sustainable development should become a very basis of the way we do business. And every one of us in this room can make a positive difference. Now, in many cases, it might not necessarily be on the job. Because particularly as a junior member of a firm, your scope of task may be fairly narrow. You may not be focused on the cathedral. You may still be just laying bricks. But anyway, in your community, you can get involved. Every community has public hearings on new development. Open to anybody. If you go, you'll probably be the only engineer there. But it would be refreshing for you to know what the issues may be and to participate in that process right at the community level. You don't have to go testify before Congress. You can do it right here in town. There have been so many initiatives among the professional societies of engineering and other things, industry associations, government agencies, and on campuses, promoting the concepts of sustainability, the triple bottom line. It would be impossible for me to mention even a very small fraction of them. Essentially now, every engineer professional society, nationally and internationally, has embraced the concept. Among the U.S. professional societies, ASCE took the lead over 15 years ago, when it included in a list of its first 7 fundamental canons: engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public and shall strive to comply with the principles of sustainable development in the performance of their professional duties. And that's been there for well over a decade. Now, beyond professional societies, many public and private organizations are actively engaged in well. As I've already mentioned before, many of you are aware the U.S. Building Council's rating tool for the design of sustainable facilities called Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, called LEED, is a standard used by a lot. Here on this campus is an example. Many communities, the General Service Administration of the federal government, the Corps of Engineers, and on and on and on. LEED has kind of been picked up. It's not perfect. And it's not perfect because it focuses really more on the green side of things and not on economic and social. But it's better than nothing. The newer versions get better and better and are increasingly cited by many as a standard to be achieved. How many of you see Engineering News Record once in a while? Huh? Engineering News Record? Oh, okay. Engineering News Record is a weekly magazine which is probably the primary journal for engineers and constructors in the United States. Just keep that in the back of your mind, ENR. Every issue of ENR now has something about green or sustainable design and construction. 10 years ago, you couldn't find it, but you can certainly find it today. Let me expand a little bit on what ASC is doing in the area of sustainability. First, our current definition, and it's not exactly the definition that appears on the Auburn website, but our definition, this will not surprise you, sustainability is a set of environmental, economic, and social conditions in which all of society has the capability and opportunity to maintain and improve its quality of life indefinitely without degrading the quality, quantity, and availability of natural, economic, and social resources. And sustainable development is really the application of that. Just before coming here, I checked Wikipedia. I have this horrible habit of when I've got a new word particularly, and somebody's using it, I don't think they're using it correctly, I actually go to the dictionary. Now, I'll confess, sometimes it's not here, it's something I leaf through. And it's amazing what the actual accepted definitions are of words that people use out of context. But anyway, I decided I'd look up sustainability in Wikipedia on the computer. And I found that it also, today, refers to sustainability using the triple bottom line definition. And right from Wikipedia, 3 days ago, for humans, sustainability is the potential for long-term maintenance of well-being which has ecological, economic, political, and cultural dimensions. So they took the cultural and political, that's sort of the social piece, if you will. Sustainability requires the reconciliation of these environmental, social equity, and economic demands, also referred to as the 3 pillars of sustainability. So I must tell you how absolutely relieved I was to find out that I am sustained by Wikipedia in my definitions. Now, we address environmental, economic, and social as equal considerations in making balanced decisions. But as I said, for any decision environment, we have those 3 adverbs, add others that are applicable, and achieve the correct balance for that particular situation. There is no exact formula. 1/3, 1/3, no. 1/3, 1/3. It doesn't work quite that well, but a balance. ASC has some other sustainability activities which include, 1, adopting a policy recognizing the leadership role of civil engineers in sustainable development and their responsibility to provide effective and innovative solutions in addressing the challenges. Secondly, we adopted a policy on capacity building, if you're familiar with what that term means, which promotes the building of indigenous capacity in the developing world. It has a lot to do with stability operations of the military and other operations of U.S. aid, the State Department, and other agencies in helping failed and failing states avoid what could fall into armed conflict, revolution, civil war. Capacity building. Third, describing ASC again, describing the critical role of engineers in a sustainable world in a report, the vision of civil engineering in 2025. In that report, the global civil engineering profession, and this was done with an international group, not just a U.S. group of civil engineers a few years ago, the report recognizes the reality of shrinking natural resources, the desire for sustainable practices in design, the deficit in infrastructure performance and the attitude to support a desired quality of life, the need for social equity in the consumption of resources. And 4, included as a goal in our strategic plan that the society will facilitate the advancement of technology to enhance quality, knowledge, competitive sustainability, and environmental stewardship. For more information on that, the documents, and you can get to them through the ASCE website. One is the Vision for Civil Engineering in 2025, which was our effort about 6 years ago to say, where are we going as a profession? Not just in the United States, but worldwide. The second was one that we did in the United States, was achieving the vision for civil engineering in 2025. And that's sort of how do we plan to get there. It had a bunch of specific steps that ASE intended to take. And then the third is the civil engineering body of knowledge for the 21st century. An effort by ASCE to take a look at where we want to go, how we're going to get there, and then developing a separate document called the body of knowledge. The body of knowledge that all civil engineers that intend to work at the professional level should attain. A few years ago, ASCE reignited its sustainability efforts that really started out with a bang and then kind of got lost in the shuffle for a while by identifying sustainability as one of its 3 top strategic priorities, which includes renewing the nation's infrastructure, raising the bar on civil engineering education, and 3, sustainability. In its statement of sustainability as an issue, ASCE says, a more environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable natural and built environment is essential and achievable. The need and opportunity underscore civil engineers' evolving role as policy leaders, environmental stewards, and life cycle planners. ASCE's board of direction desires outcomes which include this sort of a vision that ASCE is, in fact, a leader in establishing a widely recognized framework for project and professional credentialing that advances sustainability principles in civil engineering, and that we are recognized and sought after as leading and trusted advisors in planning and delivering more sustainable infrastructure. And lastly, that civil engineers, all of you, fully understand, embrace, and apply the principles and practice of sustainability in your work. Now, as I mentioned before, the U.S. has had now for a number of years, thanks to the U.S. Green Building Council, a sustainable certification program for buildings, this building. But we have not had one addressing sustainable infrastructure or having a sustainable infrastructure rating system. We now do. As part of our sustainability initiative, we established the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, ISI. We co-founded ISI with industry partners of the American Public Works Association and the American Council of Engineering Companies. And we're proud to have been an integral part of the creating of that, and the rating system is called Envision. Don't try to figure out if that's an acronym or not. It's not. It's just a neat word. Envision. Okay? It's not an acronym. Envision. Envision is the name of the rating system. ISI also provides training on that system, and graduates have become official verifiers who provide independent third-party project assessment. Project owners can now engage with the Envision system to rate their projects. You can download the Envision rating system if you wish and use it as a reference to designing your own sustainable infrastructure. And you can find it at www.sustainableinfrastructure.org. Simple. ISI recently announced that it now has 1,200 individuals that have attained the Environmental Sustainability Professionals certification to be verifiers of that. The ISI credential practitioners are trained to use the Envision rating system. It would be kind of good if some on the campus, some of the faculty perhaps took that. It's a fairly simple thing to become exposed to the Envision process and to become a certified verifier. In fact, the campus might benefit from that a bit. Since the launch of Envision in 2012, over 400 companies, agencies, and universities have applications for credentialing. For example, HNTB Corporation is committed to enroll 100 of its people in the credentialing program, and on and on. Turning to what's happening on campuses across the nation, I invite you to visit the website of any college or university in the United States. And for those of you who are already graduates, did not graduate from here, I've already heard everybody that's here, look at Auburn. Look at your own alma mater. Look at your alma mater, you older folks, and see what's going on back there. You might be absolutely delighted, surprised, and you become a little bit better informed about what's happening concerning sustainability in your own alma mater. I've had the distinct pleasure to recently visit the University of Texas in Austin, the Ohio State University, my graduate school alma mater, and the University of Virginia, Tufts, and a couple of others. And for each one of them, I've explored, as I indicated earlier, the keyword sustainability. I'm absolutely amazed at how pervasive the idea is. Now, I'll confess to you, when you look at the university's website and you look up something like sustainability, you'll get the high-level stuff. What did the president say? You know, what are the policies? And what I would invite any of you is drill down a little bit what's really happening in the curriculum, for example. What's really happening on the management of the campus and its facilities, for example. What's really happening within research. That's where the rubber meets the road. And I wish Auburn very well in pursuing that. Well, wrapping this up, engineers, in my opinion, are absolutely essential to a sustainable future. And without our involvement, it simply will not happen. No way it can happen. We translate needs, technologies, resources, and dreams into reality, and as I indicated earlier, for better or for worse. But we certainly don't create the built environment alone. We must work in collaboration with an awful lot of other people. Reach out. But we must help set that new direction. Otherwise, it won't happen. Our kids, our children, their children, and I can say my great-grandchildren because I've got 4, deserve a future of security, stability, and sustainability, which will provide enduring peace for all of them. We cannot risk the consequences of an unsustainable future. Thank you very much. Yep.
Well, we'll open the floor to any questions that you all might have for Lieutenant Hatch. Lieutenant General Hatch.
Hank,
Hank.
any questions?
Tom.
Yes.
Now, is the idea of sustainability fundamentally in conflict with our growth economy? Because we want the economy to grow, and keep on growing. If that is our premise, how can we really be sustainable?
Yes. Provided we balance environmental sustainability with economic sustainability with social sustainability. It's a balance. As far as I'm concerned, they all can improve. Our social condition can improve, our economy can improve, and we can protect, restore, and enhance the natural environment. Are we going to consume natural resources? Yes. Can we reduce the consumption of natural resources? Yes. Can we pursue the most fundamentally sound energy sources? Yes. But when we do that, they should be economically sustainable. That's it. Is solar and wind economically sustainable today? I would say no. Not now. Not now. If it weren't for massive public funding subsidy, it'd be flat on its face. Can we do better? I hope we can. Another source of energy that has languished, which one is that? Yes. A lot we can do in that area in a very, very sustainable way. We have spent nuclear fuel in pools at every one of our sites that we lack the political will to move to one or more central locations and reprocess to new fuel rods. 98% of that material can be reprocessed to provide new rods. That's what they do in France. France gets 80% of its electricity through that source. And France reprocesses spent fuel. Not only French spent fuel, but German and Japanese spent fuel, with essentially no environmental risk. What do they store? They store that 2%. The rest of it goes back into new fuel rods. I extrapolated. But I believe, yes, we can. Is there a conflict? Yes. So what do we try to do? Achieve what? A balance. You cannot suboptimize on just one of those. Sir. Anything else? I'm all yours for as long as... Yes, sir.
Sir, what's an acceptable rate of return or break-even point? You know, given that the deficit.
Depends whose money you're using. Depends whose money you're using. If you're the federal government, you don't really look for one. If you're a corporation, you're looking for one. It depends on what your stockholders and your board of direction establishes is your rate of return that's acceptable. You're talking about an economic rate of return? Yes. I mean, the federal government does not operate with a rate of return. They have a rate of receive. Right. But I mean, that's because they are providing social goods, social programs, other programs providing for our defense. So there's no, you can't come up with a return on investment of the defense dollar, for example, or a rate of return on Social Security, or Medicare, or Medicaid. The rate of return is not measured in dollars; it's measured in social good. That's tough. One of the hard things about this idea of a balance between those three is metrics. Really hard. Metrics are tough. Economic, you can do it. Environmental, a little bit, pretty well. Social is really hard. That's a soft one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the United States has been a leader in engineering for a lot of other countries to follow. And now we do have struggle inside here in the U.S. in regards to the environmental and economical returns and those kind of things. But then you look at other countries, say Brazil or China or India, Russia, that they have the challenges are even worse there. And how do you see that the technology and the leadership developed here in the U.S. can be transplanted in other nations?
By setting an example that they seek to emulate. What else can I say? One of the challenges that they have in some of those areas that you mentioned are their form of governance that simply stifles some of the things that we're talking about, the free thinking. We're freer than any of those that you mentioned, even though we have some limitations that frustrate us. I mentioned the Cold War. I mentioned the Berlin Wall. Who tore down the Berlin Wall? NATO? Our own tanks? Who tore it down? It was torn down from the inside by the East Germans. That's kind of how you get there. They knew there was a better world out there, thanks to a lot of things. Voice of America, a lot of the different things. They increasingly understood more about what was happening in the world. When you think of China, 20 years from now, with a population that hopefully will be able to be far more aware of the world than they are today. Wow, it's a daunting thought. I don't think of them necessarily as a competitors or a threat right now, but I think of the wonderful opportunities that they may have if they enjoy that freedom. Long answer to that, I'm sorry. Anything else?
If I may ask, engineers are optimizing within the constraints which they have. But I think what we need is many more engineers in the government. Because, all these aspects which you mentioned, the social and so on, engineers are not, their constraints are defined so that they just cannot consider these other options.
You're right. Yes, I agree. The number of real engineers in the Congress today is minuscule. Most of them are lawyers or whatever, and they don't have the technical wherewithal. That's one of the reasons why we need to really work with them to educate them. ASC, for example, among the other societies, does a lot of work on the Hill in the way of educating, not lobbying in the classic sense, but educating members of Congress and their staff. But if more engineers would be willing to run for office successfully, it would be great. Most of the leaders in China have been engineers. Several of the recent premiers in China, engineers. The reason for that is that the communist regime there, appreciated the technical capabilities of those individuals and what they could provide to their country in real terms. We aren't quite there at this time. But I think we can have an influence on it. We can have an influence on it. Sir, was that an observation or a question? But you're right. In ASE, in fact, we say a lot of things about encouraging members to become active politically. To become active politically. But it's generally not in the DNA of those of us that are attracted to engineering. All right? You know, left brain, right brain, you're familiar with that kind of idea, right? To be active politically and to be effective politically, you got to be a little more on the right side of that vertical line. And we engineers tend to be left brainers. We want to crunch the numbers, and don't necessarily want to get in front of people and talk. You know, so there's a little bit of a dichotomy there. But I think we can encourage engineers, and we're doing it right now, encouraging engineers, young engineers, to be active beyond just your engineering profession. I mentioned earlier, being active in your community. Frankly, that's where political career began. Being active in your community. Take an interest in what's happening socially, culturally, in your community. Don't just ignore it. Anyone want to take exception to what I've been saying? You do so at your own risk, no? Yes, sir.
We had a project over the past couple of years, we're looking at waste management, which is sustainability.
Yes.
And the fact we're throwing a bunch of stuff away every day.
Yes.
I'm very in tune that, you know, we might as well reuse so many things to throw away.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that keeps coming back is, you gotta turn it to the market. We're a capitalist society. You know, we can only affect so much change by saying we want to do it, but until you get entrepreneurs who want to do it, they're the people who are economic drivers for this. So I'm just kind of curious, you know, we always argue, I mean, this state is fairly conservative with subsidies and policies that affect it, we see other states. Do you think there needs to be a national wave of pushing agenda and kind of pushing down the states to really allow this to happen? Because we see so many things in our history have been subsidized and created. The energy industry is just subsidized.
Yeah, that's one of the problems there is that we don't really have true economic sustainability at work. Subsidies are a crutch. Long-term subsidies are a straitjacket, and that just, you know, just stops things. So I think in large measure it's a question of true economic, unfettered economic sustainability and a true market economy. Well, one of the reasons why, you know, recycling is really, you know, started off as a great thing. We all love that. But then a lot of aspects of recycling, people quickly realized was not economically sound. We realized, wait a minute, recycling aluminum cans, that's probably at the top of the list. Because you save a lot of power and yada, yada, yada in recreating aluminum. And then a few other things followed. A lot of us recycle because it feels good. I recycle like the dickens. I don't know what happens to it. I think it gets shipped overseas where it's actually segregated and recycled because it's more economically feasible to do that. But recycling is a good example of, if it's not economically feasible, it simply will not really be sustainable.
I always say that, you know, tell my students, there's certain things, you can't say you're going to do everything sustainable, right? There's certain parts of your life and certain parts of things, if you put a drop in the bucket every day,
right,
you're working your way towards sustainable.
You're right. Let me just step out for a minute on sustainability. You can take this notion of sustainability way outside of everything we've been talking about. Your personal relationships should be sustainable. You figure out what adverbs. Any enterprise, whether it's marriage, having a boyfriend, girlfriend, running a company, running a government, should be sustainable. And should get careful consideration. You see this? Is that a good example of sustainability? Absolutely not. Absolutely, I'm not criticizing the gentleman that gave this to me. No, what we do at home is we get a few of these every now and then. Then I fill it up with tap water. Then it goes back on the fridge. I hate doing this and breaking a seal, because that just means that I've wasted some resources. ASC had a little ditty. They were giving out water bottles, to be refilled water bottles. And on the side of it, I forgot what they were. It cost like 40,000 times as much to produce this as it does simply to fill a water bottle with tap water. So just think about that for a minute. I I see a couple people hiding their water bottle. But I'm glad he gave me the water. But before I leave, I'll fill it up with tap. No idea, when I fly, you know, you can't take this on the plane. So I empty out my water bottle, go through security. So I get it through security, I go fill it up with tap water. How did I get off on that? You got me off on that, sir. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that solar and wind aren't sustainable right now, and like they need to be subsidized, but is it worth subsidizing it now to offset something like the environmental damages and to develop the technology and manufacturing just in like a short term?
To a limited extent. But I think there's too much hype right now about solar and wind. I mean, the adverse impacts, wind, for example. How many eagles are you going to kill? People don't even think, how many birds are killed by the windmill? A lot. Thousands of them. I don't know about that. Energy is a good topic that requires an awful lot of balance among the various sources of it, while at the same time we do our best to conserve. Remember I talked about supply and demand for infrastructure? We all ought to be in demand control for natural resources and for energy. We should be. Yes, sir.
Speaking of energy, so civils don't typically have a whole bunch of hand in the energy conversation. How do you think our role is in kind of pushing that forward?
I'd say first is simply a citizen. Okay, because we as civil engineers, although we build the stuff, we build the infrastructure in many cases that supports the suppliers of industry, of energy. We're not actually energy producers ourselves. So I just talk like a citizen. I'm not talking necessarily as a civil engineer when it comes to promoting one particular form of energy or another. Yes?
In the balance that you're talking about, should we put the same weight in social, economic, and environment, or is one more, we should put more weight in one right now?
I walk into the problem saying they're all equal.
They're all
But now show me the facts. Explain to me the circumstances. Let me see the situation. It depends. What's the purpose for the endeavor? I start out by saying they're all equal. In fact, that may be you say that's a bit of an overstatement, but I'm sort of doing that in part to get away from a sole focus on green. Got to think beyond the environment. Think about the others and put them initially on an equal playing field.
I'm just wondering because every definition that you read, always environment comes first. So when you think about sustainability, environment comes first and then economical and then social.
Well, one of the reasons the environment continues to pop up was, again, as I said before, the whole concept of environmentally sustainable development is that's kind of where we started. We sort of brought in the others and looked at it with our blinders off. One of the reasons why the environment is there is because of its current, the level of political and public support the environment enjoys, and the extent to which it is promoted. And I would say it's promoted out of balance with the others. I consider the social just as important, as tough as it is to measure the social. That's just as important, in my view. I mean, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but just take a very close look at the Endangered Species Act. I'll say no more. Take a real close look at that, and how it has been managed and what happens with it. Absolutely marvelous and worthwhile initial purposes, but now used for a lot of other agendas other than to save non-human species. I don't want to get into too much trouble here. Oh, I'm not being taped. Oh. Hey, okay, something else, please.
Can you comment on the climate change issue, on how the sustainability is linked to climate change?
As soon as I take off my fur coat, I'll talk. The climate change issue, in my opinion, has also been overly politicized. And we have a hard time of understanding, civil engineers, we're kind of right off the street. We're not climatologists, we're not climate scientists. But I must tell you, the arguments, the discussions that I listen to, and I listen to all sides of it, I get a little tired of those that sort of question some of the data, some of the modeling, being called deniers. Come on. The climate change. It's interesting, people don't talk about global warming much anymore. It's climate change. It's a softer word. I think we need to really approach that very carefully. Because if we don't, we will continue on a path that has been partially started on to limit our environmental, economic, and social development of this country. The price we pay to reduce CO2 emissions, for example, must be weighed against the costs of doing that. And as soon as somebody waves their arm and says, we've got to reduce CO2 emissions to such and such a level, this is going to happen, you know, this hockey puck, it was like, I won't get onto the fact that it hasn't happened to that extent, but I approach that very cautiously. We are so bombarded with the passionate on any subject. Take it all with tongue-in-cheek. Take it all with tongue-in-cheek. Particularly those of us that are relying and don't have personal, face-to-face experience with things. We're dependent on the media. Right? Or Facebook, or Twitter. Be careful. Tongue-in-cheek. Don't take it all necessarily literally. Anybody have anything else? Yes, sir.
That's another question. You mentioned something that I really agree upon is our control on the demand side, which is never questioned. On the contrary, sometimes there is an incentive for people to consume more energy, water, and so forth. Are you aware of any book or guidelines or something that would be like along the lines of sustainable demand? What would be the amount of sustainable kilowatt-hour consumption or water supply or something on the very fundamentals that would be reasonable and in tune with the sustainable growth?
I can't answer that question, but I'll answer when you didn't ask. I'll give you an example of smart growth versus urban sprawl. Urban sprawl and smart growth, you can already tell because of those terms that urban sprawl obviously must be bad because sprawl is bad, right? And smart growth must be good because smart is good. Well, tongue-in-cheek again. Well, the idea of smart growth means build where the infrastructure already exists. Loudoun County, Virginia. It's bizarre. Actually, they passed an ordinance that you can't build a home unless you got 10 acres. Huh? 10 acres? Who builds the road to it? On and on. I lived in Germany for 3 years. Germany clusters its development in clusters. And in a small village, if you're going to develop, you don't go out here and build a house. You can farm out there, but you drive from your home in the village. And if the village is going to increase in its size, it does so one little street at a time. And on that street, houses are built close together. But you go out into the fields, and they're wide open. Fly over France, fly over Germany as you approach. If you're going in, you can see it. Not in the United States. We like a car, and we like to develop out there. And I say one thing to do is, this was a Ronald Reagan expression, the beneficiary pays. You want to build a house out in Loudoun County on a 10-acre plot, you will pay to get that road out there. Not the rest of we taxpayers. You do it. And you know what happens all of a sudden? Oh, maybe I'll I'll tear down a house in Old Town Alexandria, I'll build a new house there. Infill development is marvelous. I see this right in little Vienna, Virginia. Old small houses being taken down and very, modern houses being built right there. The infrastructure's already there. Don't they build a new street, new sewer line, new telephone lines? No, it's all there. Just connect to it. But if people that benefited from non-sustainable practices had to pay the total cost, life cycle cost of it, we have an amazingly refreshing environment, I believe. The beneficiary pays. Think about that every now and then. The beneficiary pays. Oh my. We've gotten a little off my initial track. It led me there. Anybody have anything else? How much time? It's a couple of minutes after 3:30. Should we call it a day?
We can.
It's up to you. Anybody have anything else? Okay, I'll be here for a few minutes. Thank you all very much.